Well, good evening. Thank you for being here, despite all the college basketball that's on. And I know you're intently watching your brackets, as am I. Not at all. So thank you for being here. Tonight is going to be a very educational process. I've seen a sneak peek at the video, and so it is incredibly good and incredibly well done. So I think you'll enjoy that. We have two speakers this evening. Looking forward to hearing their perspectives as well. And just very briefly, I'm here to say you all are leaders here, either on the task force or on the committee or on the council, and have a tremendous ability to influence the direction of this visioning process. And so tonight is really a night to ask questions and learn as much as possible before we really get to the heart of what this is about. And I believe that's the town hall meetings and getting that public input. So thank you for being here, and I'll now turn it over to Craig Rapp.
Thanks, Matt. Well, as the mayor said, my name is Craig Rapp. I am the consultant for the city visioning process. I'm not going to bore you with a long speech, but I do want to give you a little perspective on tonight. What you're all invited to is the second meeting of the visioning task force. The second meeting, when we scheduled this, was to be an educational session. One of the things that we've learned in doing visioning processes is that it's sometimes difficult for folks to wrap their heads around the amount of change that can actually occur in a 25-year period of time. So we find it beneficial to talk about and hopefully illustrate things that can occur in that time frame. So early on, I challenged the city to give me a presentation, not knowing exactly how they would do this, give me a presentation that would depict the amount of change that had occurred in Lakeville over a 25-year period. The idea was to help the task force to get a sense of the magnitude of change that can occur in that, so that as they think forward in the task that they have in front of them, which was to create a blueprint for the future, they understand that magnitude of change. They have exceeded my expectations, and as you'll see in a minute, the video is a great representation of that for the city. To follow up on that, we've also got two speakers this evening. And when we started putting this together, we realized that we wanted to invite more than just the task force, so we thought that the city council should be involved in this, and we also put out an invitation to other leaders in the community, those being the folks who already have a stake in this as members of boards and commissions. So that's why there's a diversity of participation tonight. So I'll be introducing our speakers later, but the speakers that we've brought together just briefly are a former state demographer who will talk about demographic changes and future drivers of change, and the CEO of the Minnesota Association of Realtors. So without further ado, we'll have you sit back and enjoy the video, and we'll transition in a minute after that to the presentations.
This is your city, where you live or work, where you send your kids to school, or where you have your business. Whether you choose Lakeville because of its convenience, its schools, its parks, or its people, this is your city. This is Lakeville, and this is your chance to shape its future. A visioning process is underway to help identify the values and priorities of the community. This process will guide the city in future decision-making. The strategies developed will impact Lakeville for generations to come. The visioning process is about looking ahead, but we'll begin by taking a look back. What were the factors that created Lakeville? In 1853, the first claim was made near Lake Marion for a settlement called Lakeville. A military road went through that same year, bringing new settlers to the area. In 1858, Lakeville officially became a township. 10 years later, the railroad came through, creating another transportation route. The downtown settlement officially became the village of Lakeville. In the early days, Lakeville was served by 7 different one-room schools. In the 1940s, the state wanted standardized education and required consolidation into school districts. The Lakeville School District was formed, but it did not follow the township boundaries. It included parts of both Scott and Dakota counties and went as far south as Elko. This would become School District 194. Other areas eventually went to Farmington District 192 and to Rosemount District 196. These irregular school district boundaries still exist today. Up until the 1960s, farming remained the most significant social and economic factor in the community. In the first 100 years, the township itself had only grown to about 3,000 people, with 1,000 students. Between 1960 and 1970, the population grew to 7,500, more than twice the growth of the previous 100 years. 80% of this new growth consisted of young families with multiple children. Many of these first-time homebuyers moved into the moderately priced single-family homes in the new Valley Park development. Located in the isolated northeast corner of the township, Valley Park developed because the land was inexpensive and had access to public water and sewer systems in Apple Valley. Lakeville did not yet offer these services. In 1966, Hitchcock Industries bought 1,400 acres of farmland in southern Lakeville Township. This property would become the site for Air Lake Industrial Park. The location had easy access from Interstate 35, which had been completed in 1963. It would also be connected to the railroad system and to a new airstrip. This buildable land with transportation access was destined to bring growth to the community. The village and township governments recognized the impact this growth would have. It would affect everything from water and sewer needs to police and fire protection. The development of Air Lake Industrial Park compelled the township and village governments to join together. And so, in 1967, the city of Lakeville was born. That same year, the city hired consultants to assist the council in preparing the first comprehensive municipal plan. The 1970s brought rapid residential growth, with population increases of more than 1,000 residents per year. The population in 1970 was 7,500, with 2,500 students in the Lakeville School District. In the face of this dramatic growth, community leaders sought to protect and preserve open space. And in 1974, the city hired the first Parks and Recreation Director, Steve Mashad.
During my tenure, 1974 to 2012, we went from a small community, and this may be parallel to the actual community itself, road systems, sewer systems, water systems, small farm community, to a bona fide suburban operation. And you go from small operations to big operations. It's a big transition, not only in trying to set up management, organizational, logistical issues, but you're serving, instead of 7,000 people, you're serving 56,000 people.
Residential areas in the township included Valley Park, served by the Apple Valley sewer system, areas near Orchard Lake and Lake Marion with wells and septic systems, and the downtown village area, served by a small Lakeville sanitary system. In 1976, the Dakota Heights subdivision was approved for North Central Lakeville. It turned out to be a costly decision. Unlike Valley Park, Dakota Heights had no access to a sanitary system. Approval of this non-concentric development meant sewer lines were needed to serve the area. Laying trunk lines throughout the community would ultimately have been necessary, but this development forced the young city to fund the cost all at once. By the mid-'80s, development accelerated and growth management became more complex and more necessary. In 1985, the Lakeville population had grown to about 17,000, with 3,200 students in the Lakeville School District. That year, 192 single-family home permits were issued, an all-time high. Just 1 year later, 483 permits were issued. This was the beginning of the residential boom. As a residential growth soared, the city worked to meet the increasing demand for city services. Every department, every service was affected.
It was very busy back then. Early on, it was very slow, but when the real development trends started to come our way, it was just nonstop action all the way till 2012.
As the population grew, so did the number of students and the need for more schools. During the 1980s and 90s, District 194 built 6 new elementary schools, along with both a middle and high school. Numerous additions and renovations were also made to existing buildings in order to meet the demands of the growing student population. By 1990, the population reached 25,000, and the school enrollment was nearly 5,000. Recognizing the need for significant infrastructure improvements, in 1988, the city hired its first full-time city engineer, Keith Nelson.
Going back in the early 80s, and you look at a map in Lakeville, sort of had development up at the Valley Park area, you had development at the Dakota Heights area, you had development around the lake, and you had downtown. Then you had a couple mobile home parks, scattered here and there. And that was basically it. When development came, we've always had our comprehensive plans. Where does the sanitary sewer come from? Where's the water main? How do we build this in an orderly fashion? So you have to plan your infrastructure. So development might be premature here because sewer isn't available. It's got to come down here first. You want to minimize lift stations. So through the CIP process and the comprehensive planning, we sort of guided development.
Anxious to kickstart business and corporate growth, in the 90s, the city purchased and installed infrastructure on an 80-acre parcel at County Road 70 and I-35. While controversial at the time, Fairfield Business Campus ultimately led to a development that is home to national corporate headquarters and high-tech research and development companies. With population increases of more than 10% per year, the council needed to evaluate how the growth would impact city services. So, in 1991, the council took a unique step and authorized a 1-year growth moratorium on new residential plats. The moratorium did not include commercial or industrial development. The council also authorized a fiscal impact study and created a task force to review the findings. Ultimately, the study showed that home values needed to be above $140,000 to generate enough taxable value to cover the cost of required public services. As a result, revisions were adopted to provide higher standards that would increase home values. In the early 2000s, more families continued to move to Lakeville, generating the critical mass needed to attract commercial development. Since that time, more than $170 million in new commercial construction has been added to the city. Adjacent to commercial centers along the I-35 and Cedar Avenue corridors, the Metropolitan Council built park and ride facilities for transit users. In 2005, Lakeville hit its peak of development, with 930 platted lots and 789 building permits. Due to the downturn in the economy, by 2010, the city's permitting activity had dropped to just 138 permits. Today, housing starts have rebounded, and residential growth is once again climbing. In 2012, single-family home construction was the highest since 2004. Today, Lakeville has a population of 57,000. District 194 has 10,600 students, 2 high schools, 3 middle schools, and 8 elementary schools. Because of the non-conforming school district boundaries, 1,600 additional students from Lakeville attend Farmington schools, and 2,100 are in the Rosemount-Apple Valley School District. All 3 districts are continually seeking creative ways to manage student enrollment trends. Lakeville's success did not happen by accident, nor did it come easily. It took vision, planning, and an investment from the community. Over 30% of Lakeville has yet to be developed, and important decisions need to be made about how we grow into the future. You can influence the way the city develops over the next 25 years. Envision Lakeville is designed to bring people together, to share their thoughts and ideas about how they see the future. What is your vision, your plan? What investments would you make for the next generation? This is Lakeville. This is your city. And this is your chance to shape its future.
Not bad, huh? Yeah, that's it. I got to tell you, honestly, if you're not inspired to think about the future as a result of that, you're not trying. So I don't know if you recognize the fact that in 1985, roughly the 25-year frame, Lakeville was 17,000 population, and it's 57,000 today. So in that last graphic where the blue filled in on the map, a lot of that blue happened in the last 25 years. So think about that 25-year period. That's what we're going to do now. We're going to think about the next 25 years. So I'm going to the glasses here, folks. We've got two speakers coming up. I'm going to introduce both of them now, and then they'll come up one at a time and make the presentations. The first speaker is Dr. Hazel Reinhardt. Dr. Reinhardt is a demographer. In fact, she's a former state of Minnesota demographer. Started her career, however, at the University of Wisconsin at Madison, teaching that. She came to Minnesota to take the job as state demographer, and subsequent to her time at the state of Minnesota, went to Coles Media and was a vice president there. Ultimately started her own consulting business back in 1991, focusing on media and population studies. And she has a particular expertise that is relevant for tonight's presentation in schools. She recently did some work with the Lakeville School District, but she does a lot of work with schools on population and enrollment analysis, particularly the relationship between school-age children and housing. So I think for our particular needs tonight, and as we talk about the visioning, this will be an interesting presentation. Dr. Reinhardt will be followed by Chris Galler. Chris is the CEO of the Minnesota Association of Realtors, a position that he has held since 2007. And as you can probably tell from that designation, he has a lot of background in a really important driver in the future of Lakeville, and that being real estate. The Minnesota Association of Realtors is the voice of real estate in Minnesota, representing 17,000 realtors, and they are the chief lobbying group across the state of Minnesota in that area. Just as another side note, Chris does certainly understand Lakeville, and he is a resident of Farmington. In fact, he served on the Farmington City Council for a period of time, so he knows this area well. Why don't you join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Hazel Reinhardt, our first speaker.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here. I'm going to take a perspective at a macro level and then you might say it sometimes, what does this have to do with Lakeville? But I want to assure you that you will not escape the big driving forces that are at work in the nation, and I'll bring it to the state and metro area and down, hopefully, to this community. Population is, in and of itself, basically a boring subject to most people. So I find that most often you have to say to people that it does matter. And the reason that most people find it rather boring is they describe it like watching grass grow or paint drying, that you have to take a very long perspective to see the change. You don't see it in a year or two. And so that's why I'm going to look at 30 years here. The other thing I want to say to you is that the broad trends are projectable and actually quite accurate. And the late Peter Drucker, the great management consultant, said that if you know the present well, you can know the future. Notice he didn't say the past, he said the present well. You can know the future. And that is simply because a population sort of rolls forward. It has something in common with math in that it is a building block concepts. If we were to look and think about the big macro trends, I would suggest to you that there are 4 major demographic trends in the United States today. They have been discernible for, at least 7-8 years. They will carry on, I think, in most of our own lifetimes. And the big one, and I'll spend some time on it, is the aging of the population. And that means more than you and I getting an additional year older every 12 months. It means that we are all, as a society, getting older, and that as a society, we will never be young again. I like to say, because I'm long past it, of course, that it will be very hip to be 40. Middle-aged will be where most people are. And I'll tease in a couple of things. Most of us think about age in terms of a life stage, and we think about housing in terms of a life stage. But there is also a concept known as generation. And by that, you've probably heard of terms like the baby boomers, which some of you are, the millennials and the like. And that is very, very important because we cannot assume that the generations, the millennials, or the next one, the gamers, or Gen Z, or whatever you're going to call them, are going to have the same values and behave in the same way at the same life stage as you did or as I did. And that's really, really critical, is to say everything we know and knew may not really apply. Increasing race, ethnicity, diversity in the nation brought about by immigration, differential birth rates, the like. Minnesota is still, even though it is getting far more diverse, Minnesota is still a very white, not Hispanic state. And what my most intimate knowledge of Lakeville is the Lakeville School District. And the Lakeville School District is still one of the whitest school districts in the metro area. So just so you get a sense of where you are today. Another topic that we hear a great deal about, and it's a complex topic, but we have an increasing gap between the educated population and less well-educated in terms of income. It's increasing, and that is tied in with household type. And to put it briefly, today, only college-educated people get married in any high numbers. They're the only people who stay married in any high numbers. They're the only people who have their children while being married as opposed to out of wedlock. So and that's one of the big issues that we have when we try to compare income in the past with income today on the household basis. And then finally, the geographic distribution. As I watched this video, I thought of the larger issues of how the Twin Cities was growing at the various stages of your development. In the years when there was still the massive inflow of rural Minnesotans and Dakotans into the Twin Cities, that's all dried up now. We are totally dependent on people coming from other metro areas or from abroad. And let me assure you, really, we all love it here. But people don't move here unless they have an economic reason to do so. We don't come to hang out. It's not that kind of climate, as we are well aware on the 21st of March here. That means that as we look at what's happening in America, we look at what's happening in Minnesota, we look at the Twin Cities, that we are getting concentrations of population characteristics by geography. States are increasingly differ from each other. Metro areas differ from each other. And within metro areas, suburbs are more different from each other than they were 25 and 35 years ago. So again, we see that kind of those forces at work. I want to talk now about population and the aging, because why it's so important. It's unprecedented. Historically, we've been a young population. Every population has been young. Just some little game here. Any idea of what the median age, half the population above, half below, at the time of the founding of this republic in 1789? Any idea what it was? 10. Okay. What was it at the end of the Civil War, 1865? 16, yeah. Now we're starting to push 40, and especially for the white, not Hispanic population, we're getting to be old folks. So this is sort of unprecedented. It's pervasive. It is a global phenomena, absolutely. It is enduring. That is, we can never return. There is no way of ever seeing a young population again. I thought of the video when you talked about the early years here, 3,000 population, 1,000 in school. Remember, they weren't even going to school until the age of 18 at that time. And now we have 10, 12, 15 out of 57. So you see the difference. And of course, it has many profound implications. Now, there are various ways in which age is thought about. Let's look at these. One is the median, half the population above or below. I'm starting here with 1950, before we see the full impact of the baby boom. And you can see by 1970, we had dropped 2 years in median age. It takes a lot to move median age around. And now you can see in 2010, we were at 37.2. And it keeps on going up, and it would be going up more rapidly if we did not have this large influx of young immigrants. This is the one, of course, that is a little frightening. If we look at the population 65 and over, historically thought of as retired, although increasingly not retired, compared to a working age of 16 to 64. Look at 2000. It was still at 6.2 people for every person 65. And then you can see in 30 years from today, we sort of see it at 2.9. And this, of course, is the challenge as people look at how we support a very old population. Another way to look at it is to think about the percent of the population 65 and over. 1950, 8%. 2010, 13. These are national numbers. The state looks very much like this. And then look at what happens as these baby boomers start to retire, crossing that threshold, and you can see the projection for 21% by 2040. Most likely in Minnesota, a little bit higher than that. The metro area, a little bit lower because the metro is younger. Just to give you another sense of this, we literally have, looking at the population between 2010 and 2040, literally almost doubling in the number of people 65 and over. Then look at those 85 and over. This is what really is sobering. And then look at those 100 and over. I guess this is the message to be good to one's children or grandchildren or whoever is going to have to look around. The other thing, and I alluded to it, is another indicator of aging is that the percentage of households with children declines. And you see here in 1960, half of all American households had a minor child present. We're down at 29%, projected to go down probably to as low as 24%. This really means for a community that unless you have some pockets of development that really bring young families, you get an ever lower density of children in a neighborhood. And that is one of the reasons that parents today run themselves ragged taking their kids around, because there is such a low density. And plus we're scared out of our minds that something's going to happen to them. But you know, it isn't like the days when people biked around and spent all their time, you know, sort of on their own. So what I want to leave you with is that when you think about aging, the old age dependency ratio is increasing everywhere. It's growing, increasing faster in the less developed regions of the world than in the developed regions of the world. And the older population will be increasingly concentrated in less developed regions. And this is the one I want you to bear in mind. China will be the first nation to grow old before it grows rich. Projections show that for 2030, China will have the same percentage of population age 60 and over as the United States. And theirs is, of course, an outcome of the one-child policy. But this is so it's worldwide, the population is aging. Then, of course, we have that older population getting ever older, life expectancy increasing even among the old. And then, of course, the concerns, and this I sense especially, if you think about an older population, you should view it primarily as the concerns of older women. Well, some of the key implications here, these are probably a little more macro, but I think it's worth thinking about. Has a profound effect on the labor supply. Where's my expert? There. Well, let me see here. I want to go to the previous one. And skill levels. In fact, there are projections that our level of literacy and ability to work with numbers is going to decrease in the next 10 to 20 years in the United States. Potential scarcity of capital. Potential lower housing values. And there are some experts who even say there may be more sellers than buyers for certain kinds of units. And of course, we all know the pension and retirement stuff. That shrinking ratio of workers, economic challenges here to our entitlement programs may demand new fiscal approaches. Oh boy, we have trouble with that. And then, of course, I really want to put the downer on at the end here, is that so many chronic health conditions increase with age. And the last one, which is incredible, is that today, of the 1 in 600 people who reach the age of 95, 40% of the men and 60% of the women qualify for a diagnosis of dementia. So, now, after you heard that litany, I want to pose the question to you. Will all places age? And I have to say, yes, but. And I'm going to use an example from close to home, because this shows the role of public policy and housing stock and the outcome. And I cannot tell you whether the city of Minneapolis planned this or not. I tend to think they didn't, but this is what happened. Median age went up ever so slightly, but look at what happened to the population 75 and over. It's been cut almost in half in 20 years. Where are those people? Well, they're in Richfield and Bloomington and Edina, because those communities built a lot of housing for seniors and are continuing to do so, I might add. My point in all of this is that, yes, this community will grow older. I see no way of altering that. But the type of public policy decisions you make, and as they relate to housing and other factors, you will, in one way or another, shape what this community looks like in 25 and 30 years. And that, I think, is a very, very important thing to bear in mind, that these things are going on in the world, but you are not helpless if you have a vision of what you would like this community to be. And that's why I think it's so important that you have the dialogue and you think about what you would like this to be. And it struck me as I looked at your very youthful mayor that the next 30 years are the years in which he will be alive. Some of us won't be, but he will be alive to see it. So he has a very high vested interest in it. I mentioned the different generations. And the technical term is really a cohort, but the significance of it is the attitudes and behavior related to generations do not change as people age. That's an old notion we have that, oh, well, they're going to do X, Y, Z when they get older. Oh, well, they're not. And that's why I cautioned you not to assume that the way you behaved or you thought at a given stage of life is the way these younger generations of people will behave and think. And then just to give you a sense of this, many times people think the effect of the boomers is going to be over very quickly. So I've taken here and broken out generations, this again for the US, but in 2010, those born in 1945 or before, they are 17% of the adult population. And they will drop in 2030 to about 3%, and you all understand why? I've had people ask me, why does that happen? Okay? You can see the boomers going from 1/3 of the adult population to 23%, and they will be 66 to 84 years old in 2030. That is, that entire generation will have crossed the threshold of being 65 plus. Then you see the smaller Gen X population, the Gen Y, and then whatever I call them Gen Z here. And whenever the powers that be decide that generation is cut off, depends on how many. But that grows because people are flowing into adulthood. Okay, so you see what's happening there. But that gives you a sense of when we say about the boomers, how long they will be with us. And I would suggest to you in many housing formats, people tend not to make major decisions until about the age of 75. Okay? In fact, the Wall Street Journal had a recent article about grandparents putting a lot of money into their houses to make them palaces for their grandchildren. I do understand that a bit. So just to get a sense that those boomers are going to be with us for a long time. Now, I think for you to think about is how many of the people who own some of the largest homes in this city are likely to stay in those homes until they're 75? Or will they seek to move? And then the fundamental question is, as you're thinking about the future of Lakeville, do you want those people to have an opportunity to stay here, or would you prefer they move somewhere else? Because that will, what you have on the ground, the built environment you have will determine that. So that's sort of the thing about aging. You can affect what your community looks like. Talk a little bit about race ethnicity. Race is a social concept. It's really not, it's not a genetic biological concept. And here in the United States, because of the legacy of slavery, the role of skin color is a very big deal to Americans. And it's one of the first things that Americans notice. In Canada, they don't notice skin color as much, but they're very sensitive to the language you speak. And they ask in their census endless questions on language. What was your mother tongue? What was the language you spoke at home? What's the language you use every day? You know, on and on, because that's a leftover of their historical background of the conflict between the French-speaking population and the English-speaking population. Now, the U.S. government treats Hispanic origin and race as separate and distinct concepts. And most Hispanics are classified as white, and that's why we've had to adopt the term white non-Hispanic. And I'm going to use minority as it is used in the U.S. as anyone who is not white, not Hispanic. We are having increasing racial ethnic diversity. Just to give you a sense, in 1950 in the United States, 88% of the population was white, not Hispanic. By 2010, that had dropped to 64%. Role of immigration, growth in Hispanics and Asians, and the black population share is small. If you look, 10% of the U.S. population was black in about 1790. It has stayed at about that level, and now we've added race alone or in combination. So I have the combination here at 14%, but if we had race alone, it would be 12. Just give you the sense in that. The percent of foreign born, remember Leave It to Beaver, if any of you are around and remember those. Well, you can understand why everyone looked so white and had the same kind of lifestyle, because in 1970, less than 5% of the American population was foreign born. And you saw that half of the households had mother and father and kids and that sort of thing. We're now at about 12.5%, and depending on what our federal government does, who knows what the future will be. By race ethnicity, now the largest minority group is Hispanics, projected to grow at a very rapid rate. And here I show you some projections. By 2040, the Hispanic population is projected to be 25% of the U.S. population, Asians at 9%, and blacks at 16%, and that includes both what we would call African Americans and African immigrants. Some recent studies have been just released in the last week or so that say we need to, or illustrate for us why we need to be very, very careful about not thinking of all Hispanics as the same. Because the Hispanics that have come from South America, Argentinians, Colombians, Venezuelans, Chileans are very well educated, and they are not segregated by neighborhood. Unlike the Mexican population, even though they are native born, are often still very segregated in their living. And Minnesota received the Hispanic population rather late in our development, although it is growing. My significance here is look at the median age, and that white non-Hispanic folks are indeed old folks. If you leave anything here with this, remember this: white folks are old folks and old folks are white folks. Okay? Everyone else is much younger. And that is why even here in Dakota County, we have school districts that are crossing the threshold of 50% of their students being minority students. I want to talk a little bit about what's happening in terms of income. Americans have been very, very shy about talking about social class. There's something in our DNA and the founding of this country and the philosophy behind it that we don't like to talk about social class. And class is usually based on income or wealth, occupation, education, family, background, lineage, something. It's difficult to categorize here, gets muddled up very quickly, and most sociologists would argue that class has more to do with lifestyle and social stratification than with income in the U.S. But I'm going to suggest to you that in the next 30 years, the way in which most of you will think about differences among people will be less to do with the color of their skin and more to do with their education and income. And we're seeing that starting to be played out. Let's look at what happened to the percent of population age 25 and over with a high school diploma. I happen to remember 1950, that's why I think I have a certain fondness for it. But to think that only a third of the adult population had a high school diploma, and then if you look at the change between 1950 and 1980, you literally had a doubling in the percent of people with a high school diploma. And those were the years we look back on when income grew and there was greater income equality. And now you see we're making very slow progress, and there's some evidence that we are not the graduation rate nationwide has stayed at about 70%. We can't get it to move very much. This alludes to something I mentioned earlier, that a large number of adults 16 and over aren't going to have the skills to participate in a competitive work environment. And then this last point is that compared to other countries in the world, the gap between our best, most proficient people and the least proficient is among the highest in the world. That isn't because those who are most proficient are so super proficient. It's how bad we are at the levels and the level of education, the quality of education that we provide for people who are less proficient. If you think about the post-industrial economy, if you think about the global environment and the geopolitical environment, I would suggest to you that the future competitiveness is all going to be based on brain power and technology. And so this is serious for us. Now let's look at what happened to a bachelor's degree. 1950, 6% of adults had a bachelor's degree or more. It was very rare. Now it's, I don't want to say it's common, but it's not very rare anymore. And one of the foremost management consultants, Rosabeth Cantor, always poses the question, what does a college education really mean? And after this kind of pregnant pause, she said, well, it affects the way we think about ourselves. Because there is absolutely no evidence. We can't say this is what businesses complain about every day. We can't say they're proficient or that we know if somebody has a college degree, they know XYZ or have read XYZ or are competent in XYZ. So it's again a challenge. Just as age is correlated with race ethnicity, so is the college attainment, educational attainment. And here we're looking at holding a college degree. And look at the Asian population. We have a skewed view in the Twin Cities in Minnesota because our Asian population are recent immigrants from Laos, Cambodia. But nationwide, 52% of the Asian population holds a bachelor's degree or higher. Well, never in our history has education been so closely tied with income. Okay, and that's what's happened today. And we've had a lot of, I think it's worth thinking about because we've had a lot of publicity and we've been talking endlessly about taxes and how we're going to try and increase our revenue and who should pay for it and on and on. Well, the earning $100,000 as a household, and a household can have only one person or it can have many people in it, is no longer that rare. Okay, the median household income is $50,000. This is the point that's argued about endlessly. What proportion of income does that top quintile have? And as you can see, from 1970 on, it went from 43% to 51%. The gap in the United States is greater than it is, for example, in the countries of Western Europe, but the same pattern is present, that income is increasingly going into the hands of educated people. And just something to think about, today's distribution of household income by quintile, that's, 20% in the quintiles, is similar to what it was in 1920. And the greatest equality occurred in 1967. So why this greater inequality now? Now we all know there are some people who just earn too much, right? But it's that differential that's paid for a college degree versus a high school diploma, and that has increased dramatically. And I would argue it's one of the reasons that we think everybody needs to have a college degree, and in order to accomplish that, we have to lower the requirements for a college degree. The other thing is that college graduates marry other college graduates. And you say, well, wasn't that always the case? And the answer is no, because it isn't that long ago when not as many women had college degrees. So now, women are actually going to college in higher rates. They're getting bachelor's degrees in higher rates, and they're getting advanced degrees in higher rates than males. So I would suggest you tell your daughters and granddaughters that they will marry down. Because that was not what happened in the past. Women married up. Now they're faced with marrying down. And it's one of the reasons, incidentally, that well-educated women tend to have a lower rate of marrying, is because they don't feel they can find someone of equal status and the like. And then they both work. It isn't enough that they got married to each other, now they both work. And that gives enormous income to those households compared to other households. And then finally, the point of household composition. As we look back in the era when there was greater equality, these were largely husband-wife households. And many times we hear that, oh, how wonderful it was in 1960 or 1950 when families could live on one income. We could still live on one income if we were willing to live in a 1,000-square-foot home, have one car, not be driving our kids around to 10,000 different sporting events, and on and on. We could still do it, but we choose not to. So all of those things play in, and that's why it's such a difficult issue to unpack and to think about in taxation and the like. And then, just wanted to show you here the enormous power. I like to say, sort of tongue-in-cheek, if there is ever an argument to be married and stay married, it's money. And these income numbers show it very dramatically. So it's just overwhelming. So what do we want to say about Lakeville here in terms of that? Lakeville today has higher than average median income. It has higher than average housing values. And that is likely to continue if you make certain kinds of investments. As I look around at the differences of places in the metro area, it is always dangerous to have too many housing units built at the same time of the same type. You want to give yourself some flexibility in what you can make happen. I alluded to the geographic distribution, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on that, but there are shifts in the population. You all know about this to the south and west. It's like, it's like aging. New York is sagging to Florida. and the Midwest is sagging to Arizona and Texas. And Californians are leaving California to go back into the Intermountain West or to Texas. So and recession brought domestic migration to a halt. The years of dramatic growth for the state of Minnesota and the Twin Cities metro, when you take out the 50s and 60s, was 87 to about 2000. And I know if you're native Minnesotan, it's hard to realize, but we have been in this state an exporter of people most of our history. More people choose to leave than come. And we have grown because we've had more births than deaths. The decade of 2000 to 2010, we had very sluggish growth here in the metro area. We had sluggish our job engine was not purring, let's say. The most recent data released by the state suggests that we're picking up in job growth. But without fairly robust job growth, we are not going to have robust growth in the Twin Cities metro. As I said, we don't just come here. I think what's unique for you as you think about your past and you think about the future is that you had explosive growth both before and after the big growth engine of the metro area. So that we've had really sort of the shifting around of folks within the metro area. In the United States today, we have real concentration of race ethnicity in certain states and certain metro areas. We have concentration of the foreign-born in certain places. We have concentration by age in certain places. We have a concentration of education and even generations. The baby boomers are fairly equally distributed. Gen Xers are not. They are highly concentrated in certain metro areas. So we get this real difference. And I would suggest to you, we get ourselves kind of tired of our political situation. But one of the reasons that we have some of the tensions we have is that representatives come from such very different places representing the views of their constituents that are very different from people in other places, and that's played out. In the latest projections, and this for a demographer is always makes one pause. In the United States, we have 3,143 counties. 1 in 3 of those counties now have more deaths than births. In essence, they are dying off. And that is up from 1 in 4 counties in 2009. So you can see the speed with which this is occurring. So that means there are parts of the nation that are losing population and losing it quickly, getting increasingly older. 2 states now have more deaths than births, West Virginia and Maine. We're a long way from that in Minnesota, but nonetheless, just to give us a sense of the kind of change that is occurring here. So let me recap and say to you, what does this all have to do with Lakeville? As Craig mentioned, and I've been a student of this since I've been heavily involved in school projections, but I believe from my research that housing is like DNA. It will determine who you are and what you can be. So I would say to you, think about that carefully. Remember that with this change in population in these generations, childbearing is being delayed ever longer and longer. So we have more housing units and households that are without children, even though people are 30 or 35 years of age. The other thing that's happening with increasing frequency is there are more later stage, later life divorces. People 50 plus. Estimated now that 1 in 4 of the population 50 and over gets divorced, and it increases if you've been divorced once or twice before. But that simply means, what does it say? It means there's a demand for a different kind of housing unit. And one of the issues is always, do you want to be playing that game or not? I think you have a lot going for you. The topography of Dakota County is beautiful. In my view, I'm a native Wisconsinite. I like a little rolling land and the like, but I think it's beautiful. And so it should remain attractive. The community has a lot to offer, but I think you are really faced with some decisions around whether you want more housing for mature adults. I think the housing you have it really is overwhelmingly for families with children. And it's, another misnomer we have is that people want to downsize. People never get less space until they get about 90. They just have it rearranged differently. You don't need as many bedrooms. So I think those are the kinds of issues for you to think about as you look and think about the changing demographics, the changing household composition as we move forward. So with that, I want to say thank you very, very much. And one last point here. Most recently, more population growth in the core in Minneapolis, St. Paul. I think part of that has to do with the large young population that's single. They like to go to clubs. I don't know, I'm out of that, but I don't know if there are that many exciting clubs here in Lakeville or not, but I tend to think probably not. So that's part of what's taking people downtown and less growth in the outer ring, although I would not call Lakeville ex-urban by any means. So think about that. Then I tell you where the data are from and contact information. So I thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Hazel. I'm going to now ask Chris Galler to come up. It's a lot to think about, some imposing numbers there, and we're going to transition to talking about housing. As Hazel mentioned, that is your future. So who better but Chris Galler to talk about that?
Okay. Thank you. I have to move around a lot. I am terrible just standing still like this. It's not the way that I like to go. Yeah, I'll try and stay. I just may move. I'll do the best I can. How's that? Future real estate. I'll better do that. I always like to start. Whoops. Yeah, I just got to figure out where it is. There we go. We on? All right. I like to look at a big picture. So, in my opinion, society's continuing to evolve. Nothing major there. TV actually is a good picture of society. So if you look at, and a lot of this is going to dovetail with what Hazel said, look at over on the far left. Father knows best. Anybody watch a TV show today? Anybody know one TV show or one commercial where the father knows best? Right? I mean, realistically, if you think about the way the society is today, in the 60s and 70s, dumb blondes were the dominant feature. Now it's any male that happens to be walking is dumb. And you don't hear about dumb blondes anymore. Do you think maybe that has to do with the fact that more women are graduating from college than men? And they have more purchasing power? You go in and you look at then the Brady Bunch, which was radical at the time. Mary Tyler Moore, Minnesota, radical at the time. The Waltons. But what do you also notice in there? If you watched any of those shows, what was the focus of the shows? Families and kids. So it was all about what the Brady Bunch kids were doing, or Cosby, or the other ones, Beaver, out there, was what they were doing. Then we got into the 90s, part of the 80s, part of the 90s, still had kind of that same theme with TV shows. And about midway through the 90s, there started to be a change. Now, Roseanne was less about the kids, started to be more about the adults. And Married with Children was certainly not about kids, and if it was about why in the hell would you ever have kids? And then midway through the 90s into most of the 2000s, you really started to see the demographic shift. And that was, we're really not interested in people with kids anymore. And all the hottest TV shows didn't involve kids, they involved young people. And if you look at last week's TV ratings from Nielsen, there's not a show on there about kids. So when you look at NCIS, every one of them is single or divorced. Big Bang Theory, there's the nerds. One of them just got married. NCIS Los Angeles, nobody married there. Person of Interest, nobody married there. Loners. And when you start to watch it and think about it, think about a TV show where the kids are the focus of a family. You'll have a hard time finding one. Maybe Downton Abbey for all 6 shows or whatever it is that it's on. That's a radical change, and it's a radical change because the society is also radically changing. And you could say, well, Chris, I thought you were going to talk about housing. It'll all tie back into housing. Because Hazel said, and Lakeville is predominantly one type of house. And I think it's something you're going to have to think about as you move forward. And it's not a shot. We've done a really good job over here. I lived across the way and was on city council, and this was one of the cities I looked at. It's doing almost everything right. And that's a huge compliment. And it wasn't that we weren't doing things right. You had a lot of great things. I mean, you have 2 major transportation hubs that are the envy of Farmington. We have Highway 3. Oh, boy. Let's get excited about that. And there's nothing we can do. But the nuclear family today is hard. It's dominated by single people. All the things I've said, what does it have to do with housing? We'll get into it, and we'll get into it with more facts. This is America. Some of the things that we try and talk about, it's not the program we usually do, but rapidly aging population, cities have to start thinking about it. If you want to know where you're going to be in 25 years, just look to Burnsville. Okay? You don't have to look far. And if you want to see a little bit further than that, you can look up the road into Bloomington. Because all those communities are just a little bit older than what Lakeville is. You still have room to grow. That's a huge advantage. Because most of the problems and most of the issues they're going to be dealing with, they didn't have any time to react to. Richfield's tried to do a nice job of trying to provide for housing, but you have an opportunity to look at that. Fewer married couples with children. For the real estate industry, that is a killer. Because who's been our #1 demographic? Married couples with children. And that number continues to decline, and it declines in different ways. Not only are there fewer married couples with children, but the ones that are married couples with children are having very few kids. And therefore, boy, 4-bedroom, 2-stories with 3-car garages and stuff, there's only 3 of them. And the amazing thing is, they still want the big Taj Mahal.
Because they have a lot of stuff.
They got a lot of stuff, and they want to feel good when they drive in. Because that's where they get their feelings from, and we'll talk a lot about that kind of stuff. More singles and singles with children, that's a real challenge for the society. 38% of births are to single parents. 38%. And it's no longer teenage mothers, it's women in their 20s who are deciding, you know what? Kid might be good, but a guy? No way. And they can do it now. They used to not have that flexibility. Growth in minority populations, it is increasing. Hazel's right. I do not see it as a huge factor for Minnesota. I hate to say that. And I don't say that to discriminate. It's just the number of people here, and even for home buying, the number of people in the Midwest, we'll look at some numbers of home buying numbers, their home ownership rate is very low. Asians are the exception. Asians have a very high home ownership rate, and they also have a very high educational rate. Geez, think maybe that ties together? It does. Greater economic and educational diversity. Hazel went over it well. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. Fewer homeowners going forward. Now, Colleen and Jim are in the business. They're going to hate this. But the fact is in the, in the next few years, the government is going to be taking actions that are not going to be seen favorably for home ownership. And we're trying to stay in front of it as an industry. The tide isn't with us any longer. Seniors and 38% single mothers with children are going to start to take over that dominant effect. And it will be educated women who will be making more and more decisions going forward, and their thought process is different than men's. Men's are tough luck, live out in the street. Women are much more compassionate, and that's going to cause some issues for that. And then significant changes in consumer behavior, because although housing's a big factor of what you've got moving forward, the business atmosphere and how consumers interact with businesses are going to have a huge influence on what's going to happen to a number of cities going forward. You've seen it once here, you've seen it more than once, but you saw one very recently when Best Buy moved out. Best Buy is only the beginning. It's only the beginning. The Staples of the world, all of the specialty big box stores are all in trouble, and nobody knows it yet. Macy's, JCPenney, Kohl's, all of those stores, there's too many of them. When you can pick up your phone and order it, have it delivered to your house, and send it back, no extra shipping, and now you can price it very competitively, and the software programs are so good, retail establishments are going to have to figure out what it is they actually do. And it's going to be a lot of big guys going down. Now, it doesn't mean you can't build them, you can't allow them to be developed, but think as they're being built, if this happens, what can we do with that space later on? Because too often we haven't thought about what will we do with the space later on. I'm hoping that school boards are thinking about it when they're looking at elementary schools. Look at Minneapolis, look at Richfield, guess what happens? The kids get old, they move out. Well, if they don't move out, they live with their parents, but they're not using the schools anymore. And now you've got all these big vacant buildings. What are you going to do with an empty school? Well, how about we design schools and say maybe there's a use we can figure out for the future, because what are we going to have? Are we going to have kids in the future? Not as many, but we're going to have a whole bunch of old people. And what do they act like? Kids. Maybe we figure out a way to take elementary schools and turn them into places for senior citizens to go. Because we also know that seniors want to age in place. And that creates lots of challenges for communities, especially if you've got a lot of two-story homes. Because they don't do stairs real well, and if they do fall, Elf Ambulance gets busy, and that's never good. Lakeville and all of Dakota County, including my community of Farmington next door, has a huge advantage. We're all going to be growing. And if you want to have a hard time, go out west Minnesota and some of those counties where they're losing population, they've lost it regularly. It's a lot better at the end of the year when the city administrator, Steve, doesn't have to do anything, and the finance people can say, you know, costs are going to go up 2 or 3% or whatever it is, but we've got X number of new homes coming in, and we're going to have more revenue. It's a lot better problem than we're losing population, and we got empty houses. Now what are we going to do? And as you get less resources, you saw it already with your building department as you started to lose building permits. All of a sudden, that whole side of the business changed. So it's important to think about the fact that you've got opportunities because growth is going to be coming. That means it's much easier to change and shape yourself. This is household formation. This is from the state's budget plan. They're anticipating that we're going to start to see household gain. So when people talk about the housing bubble and what happened, you can see for a number of years in the early years, we were building way more houses than households were being formed. And even before the recession, we started to see a decline in household formation. That is a long-term trend. I hate to say it, a lot of people are hoping it's not a long-term trend, but let's think again about society for the last 30 years. If you're in the real estate business and you run into a couple that happens to have 3 kids, which is very unusual, and they want to go look at houses, guess what they need? 4-bedroom house. Every kid needs to have a bedroom to themselves. They couldn't possibly share. Well, let's see. If indeed, how many people here shared a bedroom at some point in their life? Boy, and you always got your way, right? And if indeed you didn't like what your parents said, you just went up to your room, turned on the TV, hooked in your computer, used your phone to talk to your friends. Well, no, Chris. There isn't a kid in college today that hasn't lived that. Kids in college today were born in 1994, 1993, 1992, and 1990. Okay? I can remember in 1989 in Yoko Breckenridge's car. A realtor from the area for many, many years, Yoko Breckenridge's car, had one of the first cell phones, and she let me call my wife for all of about 32 seconds if I was really going fast because it was costing her a ton. Well, think about that. How many elementary kids now have phones that they walk around with? Well, they don't even walk around with phones. They walk around with smartphones that are really computers and everything else. And yet, they can't do math because we dumb down the system. It says, well, you don't need basic skills, you just need to know how to operate this. That's a scary thought. Because the world, they're not doing that in China. They're not doing that in Japan. They're not doing that in India, other places. So what we're hoping is that it'll build up. That's where we're at right now, just to give you an idea how far it fell. And way over on the left-hand side is the 1990s, and we were building lots more homes back then. Lots of permits. This is Minnesota numbers. This is housing starts again. Again, 90 is somebody that right now is 22 years old, fresh out of college. Going to be a home buyer soon. So they've seen these ups and downs. And again, housing starts out there. We got a long ways to go. So you're going to hear great numbers out there. Housing starts are up. They're almost double. That's great. But statewide, we've got a long ways to go to get back to where we were in the mid-90s. The odd years were odd, but even back to the mid-90s. And this is a real scary one. This is interest rates. And we've had interest rates at unbelievably low rates. That's where we're at today. So again, way over on the left-hand side, you were born in 1990. All you've seen interest rates do in your life is what? Go down. Money just keeps getting cheaper. And by the way, are other things that they're accustomed to getting cheaper? These get more expensive every day, right? No. Technology keeps getting faster, stronger, better, and cheaper. If indeed businesses aren't doing that, they're going to have a problem. And I would argue in the future, if government's not starting to do that, they're going to have a problem. Because consumers are going to start to demand it, and they run everything. And if you want to see capitalist pigs, consumers are capitalist pigs. They don't care where they buy it from, they only care about them. Unless, of course, they're using somebody else's money, then they can care about others. That's where that is. Especially concerning is the fact that interest rates, the Fed level, are basically zero. They're not going to see that again in their lifetime. So you say, well, Chris, what's that going to have to do with housing? Well, if interest rates go from 3.5% to some ungodly number like 6, right? How much more interest is that they have to pay? Well, Chris, it's only 2 points. No. 3.5 to 6 is almost double. That cuts down affordability significantly. Way back in 1985 when I got into business, interest rates were 17%. I can remember calling people, wow, you're not going to believe it, interest rates are down 1%. They've dropped all the way to 16. You're going to be able to afford this much more house. That was good news. And some people were happy about it. Going the opposite way is never pleasing. Again, it's like growth. Interest rates go down, you can compensate a lot of ways because people can get more. When they get less, they get a little testy. This is the federal budget deficit, and this is going to drive the interest rates. Anybody think that's not going to happen? Anybody actually think the debt's going to do what they've got projected? They haven't shown a good track record yet. Of course, we don't have a budget to actually follow it anymore, so that's a different deal. This is non-farm employment. I think the biggest key here is Minnesota is not that much different anymore than the rest of the United States. And we do have a lower unemployment rate because we have a better skilled workforce. But down on the bottom, their forecast for this year is 1.4% increase in employment. That's off of 2011, which was just a banner, remember, a couple of years ago when we actually grew at 1.7% and 1.6 last year. This is supposed to be worse than last year, worse than 2011. Now, I don't hear a lot of people talking about that, but it's right in the state's financial report they released last month. Because the population itself doesn't read, doesn't go out and seek out it's right on the website. You can go down and download it and pull it off. But you know, 2.5 Men is on. It's a lot more fun to watch them. Wage and salary disbursements, again, we're below where we've been. That one's the real tricky one moving forward. And that's, as Hazel brought up, the education differences in households out there is really going to drive what's going to occur in the housing markets moving forward. The haves and the have-nots are going to get further and further apart. And the funny thing is, what's going to happen 50 years down the road as married couples in college marry each other, but they only have one kid, and others that didn't go to college, that don't get married, are having 3 kids. I mean, we have to start thinking a little bit about the gene pool. I don't mean that negatively. I mean, there are some issues that are going to have to be thought about. This was in the Wall Street Journal this week. You probably saw it. If you didn't, 57% of households right now that are in the baby boom generation have less than $25,000 in total savings, excluding the equity in their house. 25,000. What are they going to retire on? Well, there's Social Security. Great. We educated them well. That is a huge number. And it's a huge number because the life expectancy continues to increase. And if life expectancy continues to increase and they don't have any money today to retire, Social Security isn't going to do it. We have less workers in the future. How does that equal out? And that means for a lot of people living in their home, staying in that one place is going to be their only option. They'll do reverse mortgages to get a little bit of cash coming forward. Or they've got a big box, maybe they rent it out or rent out part of it. And as they get older, maybe they rent out part of it to somebody that serves as a caregiver to them. But some of the zoning doesn't exactly mesh with that, especially if indeed they happen to be a minority family and it's a big, 3,000 square foot 2-story, 1,400 on both floors, and maybe the family decides they'll live upstairs and the owner will live downstairs, who might be in their 70s and need some help. Not all the time help, but somebody to watch over them because maybe their kids don't live in the state. They can't afford to put them in a nursing home. They can't afford to move into a nursing home. But they could have maybe somebody live upstairs rent-free. But how do the neighbors next door going to feel about that? And those are going to be the issues that divide cities and cause problems. And I don't know how you resolve them. That's a big problem. But it's going to be an issue. This is home buyers in Minnesota from last year. We just got this data. 59% of the home buyers in Minnesota are aged 25 to 44. The median age is 37. It shows you how we compare to the other states. Actually not a lot different. Closest to the Midwest. The Midwest has the youngest buyers. East Coast, a little close to us. Mostly in the West and South is where it's older as far as a median goes. I'll go fast on this. Age of first-time home buyers, 67% of first-time home buyers are between 25 and 34. Married couples, they're 30. Single females, 32. Single males, 28. Repeat buyers are on the right-hand side there. 46 is the median age for repeat home buyers. And 44 for married, 55 for single women, who we're going to talk a lot about in a minute. Ethnicity, Minnesota, 93% is white Caucasian. Again, very similar to the Midwest. Actually not far off of the Northeast either. The West and South is really where minority populations are heaviest. But even there, the West showing real good numbers, I guess you would say, compared to the others. But Minnesota isn't much different than the Midwest. Some people say, well, Chris, why did you say earlier that minorities wouldn't make up? In the Midwest, you're counting Ohio, Michigan, Illinois. Those are very diverse states. Very diverse states. Yeah. Diverse metros, that's great. That's diverse metros, but total population is fairly significant. And in Michigan, I actually lived in Michigan. Oh, even in Ohio, Cleveland, and not as much, not that big.
It's the size of Detroit, and Detroit.
What's left?
Chicago.
Yeah, what's left of Detroit?
Less than
Good. This is age of first-time home buyers. Again, oops, I got that one twice. I must have gone backwards. There you go. All right. First-time home buyers in Minnesota, you see a little bit more race and ethnicity as far as the total numbers. In fact, it looks a little bit closer as the repeat buyers for the rest of the U.S. And again, a lot of minorities are newer to Minnesota, so it's going to take them a while to get rooted and get settled and figure out the whole home buying and employment situation. We have a lot of people that have immigrated to the state of Minnesota, which is going to affect that as well. National origin, again, just kind of on that same theme. Minnesota, 96% were born in the U.S. Language spoken at home, 98% speak English at home. Fairly consistent, though, across the nation. One of the things that the Realtor Association battles is people that want every form and every language that people speak. And for sellers, it's a real problem because it's 99% they speak English. B, the court system accepts English, doesn't accept other languages. So we have translators and other things to help people in that situation. First-time home buyers, a lot of the government we'll talk about in a little bit, but you can see there 47 and 50% were first-time home buyers in 2009 and 2010. That's when they offered a 6,700 or 6,500, something like that, 8,000 home buyer gimmick in order to try and get people in, which helped home sales. They had a little blip in the screen then, and then they fell even further after the incentive was gone. So everybody bought early and then got out of the way. Minnesota were about 41%. That's fairly consistent. So as a healthy housing market, you have to have people buying that first house to push the others up the ladder or down the ladder, whichever way they want to go purchasing. But if you can't get that first home sold, it causes lots of difficulties in the market. This is first-time home buyers as a percentage, and look at the percentage here. 41% of first-time home buyers were married couples. Single females are 25%. Single males, 17%. Compared to the U.S., where first-time home buyers, 55% are married couples. Much higher number, much lower with singles. Single female, 19%, single male, 11%. In fact, in Minnesota, 41% are married couples and 41% are single people. Now you say, well, Chris, what's that got to do with anything? Drive around your neighborhoods, 4-bedroom, 2 stories, 3-car garages, one person can't afford them. Okay? Now the houses are already here, and that's the challenge for cities and developers, because people are building houses for themselves today. They really don't care what happens 25 years down the road. And that's a challenge for cities and developers to try and figure out how can we best do it. The film was real good at explaining, was it Dakota Heights, the name of it? Explaining how if you get too far out in front of the ball, it can cost you in the long run. I'm not a big fan of moratoriums either, but you have to do what you need to do in order to move things forward. This is repeat home buyers, and you see a much different picture here for Minnesota. So for Minnesota, married couples, 69%. So 41 in first-time home buyers, 69% in repeat. And we're looking at now another decade and a half older for this population base. And some would say, well, Chris, that's just because they bought them as singles and they got married later on. That number is really, the single number is growing every single time we do one of these surveys. It's not like it's getting smaller, and the married couple doesn't change a lot. So the trend line is fairly easy to see that we're going in that direction. Even in repeat buyers for the national number, you can see. This is first-time children. Minnesota, 63% have no kids. Just don't have any. And it's not far off from the national number of 58%. Ones are 26%, two, 9%, three or more, 2%. Three or more, 2%. How many people here grew up in a house with more than 2 kids? Probably a lot, yeah. And yet it's getting to be very unusual. But again, if you've got 2 working parents, the stresses on doing that is very difficult. And they're getting married later. Repeat buyers, you see it a little different. 49% don't have kids. Little more, 1% or 18% have 1, 23% have 2, 10% have 3 in Minnesota. Not far off. Income's the real line. So for Minnesota, when we start to look at where the income is, I've got a red line on there, 85 to 99,000. We're going to need that later on so you can kind of get an idea on the chart. But median income for a first-time home buyer in Minnesota is 57,000. Now, what was the median talked about earlier? 50,000. So home buyers already are above that. Even first-time home buyers are above that line. Repeat home buyers, it's 96.8. And you can look on the different charts there. For a married couple, 75.5. Repeat, 107,000. Single females, 45. When they repeat, up to 79,000 in income. Now that's the median. Single female, median income, $79,000. Men don't do that well. 75,000 for men. So that's an important thing because the homes that are being built are going to take quite an income in order to purchase, especially as interest rates go up. This is from the tax incidence study. The last one that we've got access to was 2011. On the top, you can see 87,126. That's the median income for a household, married household with kids. Below it is a married couple without kids. Now, a married couple without kids can be going 2 ways. They could be young and getting older, or they could be older and they've already got rid of their kids. And in Minnesota, it's a lot more older getting rid of kids because we've got a large baby boom population. We've got seniors, 59,122. We've got single parents at 25,895. You've got widows or widowers, single elderly people at 25, and the lowest on there is single people, 25,000. Which population base is growing? So you start to look at concerns for the housing industry, and you start to look at how that works. That one there is the challenge. This is the population deciles. So unlike quintiles, this breaks it into 10%. That's how the state likes to do it. And when they talk about taxing the rich, they're talking about households. A lot of times single people, they forget about, they're talking about us. Because the top deciles, as you can see on here, are married with children. That's the striped lines. The checkered line is married with no children. Well, Jiminy Crickets. We never thought about households that way. I guess we're talking about, 2 people working have more money than 1 person working. And home ownership works the same way. So when you start to look at where are the homeowners are in the top deciles. So when organizations lobby, they say, well, Chris, how can you be against this or how can you be for that? To a degree, who's my clientele? People buying homes, the clientele is Minnesota's top 3 deciles. Well, yeah, but we have to do something for the poor. Okay, well, who are the poor? We looked at it earlier. They're single people. Well, what are we going to do for them? How about find somebody? And if you figure it out, I got a boy at home that needs to find somebody. He's 23, he really does. And anybody that can put up with him, boy, they're going to have their work put out. Numbers of homes currently owned. This one surprises a lot of people because they're looking at getting rid of mortgage interest deduction for second homes. 25 to 44 is about 15%. own more than one home. As they get a little bit older, it gets up to 23%. Not quite as high as it is in other parts, though. So even though we have a lot of cabins and recreational properties, a lot of other states must do a lot better than what we do. It doesn't mean we do bad. It just means you can kind of get a comparison for that when you look at it. And again, that's the hardest one to argue. How do you argue that, yeah, you need a mortgage interest deduction for the second home? Because if you can afford 2 homes and these people can't afford 1 home, boy, oh boy, we have to change the policy. Yeah.
Is that a recent data point?
Yeah, it's last year, 2012 data.
Some of that second home, I think, is because people were upgrading homes but couldn't sell the house that they had because they were.
Some of it is, and I actually have another one. I just didn't want to do too many of those because I've got like, oh man, 8 different files full of stuff. So I tried to figure out exactly where Hazel was going to go and see if I couldn't fit something in the middle of it. Expected length of tenure, this is kind of important. 15 years is what the median is. That's what the median for the state is. First-time home buyers think median-wise. About 10 years they're going to be in a house. Repeat buyers 15, new homes 20. So it's a longer-term investment, and I think people are starting to recognize that it's a longer-term investment, and it's wise to think about it that way when you're putting in infrastructure, because people are going to be there for a while. It's not going to go quick. This is by age again. You see that young people, 18 to 24, of course, median-wise, they think it's going to just flip over quick. But 45 to 64, they're starting to make that last decision on a house before they go into a nursing home or someplace else. What kind of homes do people own? Detached homes, singles, still the primary. Across the nation, it's that way. But non-primary residents and seconds, 22% townhouses and apartments. That's different than what it is nationally. And that makes some sense because we do have a number of people that are going to have homes in Minnesota that also have homes in warmer states. And they're going to probably want something where they don't have to worry about the maintenance and worries with weather and things like that. Condos, townhouses serve that purpose real well. In fact, downtown Minneapolis, you can see condos getting built like crazy, and they're not for single mothers with children. They're fairly expensive properties, and a lot of them are absentee owners. They own them, they purchased them, and they handle it that way. So some changing things. Many more seniors. As you look, a lot of them are going to have limited resources, so the idea that they're going to be able to just do lots with their properties is going to be a challenge. I think cities are going to have to, as you look at your plan, and this might be beyond your visioning, but you're going to have to think about maintenance of the properties. You're going to have people living longer just in total years. They're going to want to age in place, and some of those properties are going to get in bad shape just because they're not going to have the finances to fix them up. And again, I don't have a miracle cure for that, but it is something that at least if you can start to recognize and think about it before it becomes a problem, it's easier to handle than Steve getting phone calls that, you know, we got 15 houses on this neighborhood that are just demolished and there's people living in them, and we need to do something. Fewer married couples with children, that's generally been the best demographic for housing. I think that's going to decrease going forward. I think there's going to be more of the individual thought. We haven't seen huge growth in unmarried people living together. It could be because they only do it for a short period of time. So they go from single status, unmarried living together for maybe a year or a year and a half, and then into the married couple. That's fine, right? Whatever people want to do. More singles with children and more singles, they're just financially challenged. And some kind of a mix in housing is probably what it's going to take as you look at that. Growth in minority populations is going to be a challenge. Some of it's just going to be getting better educational resources for them going forward. Greater diversity economically and educationally, you're already seeing it. You can see it even in communities. So as Hazel pointed out, there's a huge difference between Farmington and Lakeville. And they're right next to each other. So you wouldn't think about it, but it is out there. Fewer homeowners, less government involvement. Lots of studies in my briefcase back there about groups that are coming out strongly, not just the mortgage interest deduction, total overhauls of how the federal government spends their money. And housing, to a large degree, for the last 50 years has benefited tremendously from governmental assistance. It's like 80% of the resources for housing goes to current homeowners. Most of those current homeowners, as you could see, are on the wealthier end of the spectrum. I would predict in the next 10 years, you will see significant changes in how government looks at it, unless homeowners change, and that's hard to say. Less personal responsibility and more government dependence. You're already seeing that if you're an elected official. Everybody wants something for nothing, and they want more of it, and if they got their stuff, then I should get my stuff, and he should get his stuff, but none of us should have to pay for it. That's just immaturity. I mean, let's be real. Nobody believes their kids should be treated that way. So that's a change. A couple of micro considerations, again, will be on those things. Housing for today and an eye for tomorrow. You have to work with the developers, and you have to work with some of your bigger landowners, because those folks have vested interests. Some of them have their retirement tied up in that piece of land. They're not looking to take advantage of anybody. They just need to have some surety of what the future is. And by working with them, they can certainly help you as it moves forward. Married couples with big box homes to sell, I think some of them are going to start to have problems selling them. Transportation is great here up into the cities, but I think jobs and employment are going to change a lot. And that could cause a problem if you have, as Hazel pointed out, you have too much of the same thing. There's going to be some difficulties. Think of Richfield. Got a lot of nice ramblers up there. 900, what were they, 960, 960 square boxes. They were great. When I grew up, we had 4 boys. We lived in a 960 Rambler. But there's not many people looking to live in those kinds of houses anymore. Government housing policies and home ownership, we talked about it. Senior housing, want to live in place. The other is going to be healthcare workers, whether they live in the same house or if you have population sites for them, rental units, townhouses, some kind of assisted living. Maybe looking at Apple Valley, a fairly wealthy suburb as well, right on your border. I'm assuming you get along most of the time, except for 160th Street. I can remember some battles over that years ago. But maybe there's a way you can build housing in that area together so that it can be accessed, so transportation for lower end workers, because healthcare workers do not get paid a lot. And figuring out some way to deliver those services. The ELF ambulance, is it still part of the 3? Worked out pretty good, so those kinds of agreements can work out so that you can look at your services. We've got good health in Burnsville with a hospital, full-size hospital, which is good. Big box retailers and online, there isn't a way to fight it. So you get it tax-free, they ship it to you for free, and stores have all that overhead. So even if they charge taxes on that stuff, it's not going to offset the overhead that most of those retailers have. So there's going to be a huge shift there. It doesn't mean retail's going to evaporate. It's not. It's just not going to be as explosive as it was. Remember, we're coming out of the years 2000 to 2008. Every debt in the world went huge. People borrowed against their houses. They bought lots and lots of stuff. Well, stores grew to that size, and in the future, that's not going to be the same. Some of your kids you've already seen, they live a lot different lifestyle. They're going to move it. And then diminishing tax revenues, probably not for this. You guys can talk about that. But your housing is your strongest point. That's your consistent tax base out there, and having a good, healthy housing stock and one that holds value, because it could be a situation where communities may, again, at some point, go through a slowdown. Not because of the same causes, but ebbs and flows in the economy are going to continue to change. So I think that's my last one. Yep. So I'll turn it back over to Craig.
Thanks. Thank you, Chris. Actually, I'm going to ask Chris and Hazel to take a couple of seats up there. We'll give you a chance here as the audience to ask some questions. In fact, I don't know if Alan or Steve or someone is. We're gonna record this just so we have a record of it and we can refer to it later. So if you have a question, I'd ask you to use the microphone. Go ahead and just raise your hand, and Steve will recognize you. We have a lot of provocative things that were brought up here. Okay.
It's 10 to 9.
Yeah, it's 10 to 9. There you go. Okay.
Good evening. Thank you for your insights on this. What are some things that you're seeing other communities doing to look at housing stocks and either diversify or strategically align what they want to see with what they are promoting?
Chris, anything?
What, do I have to put,
There you go.
all I gotta do is talk. A number of different cities are approaching it in a lot of different ways. In greater Minnesota, the smaller cities are really trying to figure out ways, it's gonna sound odd, to demolish older housing. And if you've done some redevelopment or been on those kinds of redevelopment authorities, they know they have an older aging population that wants to stay there. They know they have substandard housing, but maybe one person has a nice house and they don't know how to knock them down. And so they're actually going into development plans where they're trying to actually incentivize it and buy some people out and build some senior housing. I've seen some programs out there where they're trying to put some loans together and help seniors especially, or poor people, remodel their homes and fix up their homes. I know the Met Council's done a
Right.
lot of work in that way. The difficulty is getting it targeted and getting to the people before they get beyond where the house can be helped. And that's really the biggest challenge, is that usually the house will get so bad before anybody realizes that demolition is the best alternative.
Okay.
I think another thing we're seeing, and I would use Richfield and Bloomington, and to some extent the southeastern corner of Edina as an example of making the decision for senior housing and taking, redeveloping land for that purpose. It probably will have some challenges for the future as well. I personally made a proposal to an architect to take some of those Cape Cods with their 1,000 square foot and try to get a city to bundle something together for elderly housing, because the reality is it costs so much to build something new that we have to find a way to repurpose some of this stuff.
Yeah.
And we know that those units are not desired by families with kids.
Right.
So I don't know, I think in some ways we're in early stages of this, Ed. And then if you follow what the city of Minneapolis, I'm ever amazed of all the now proposed 3 high-rise rental luxury towers. I guess I'm just getting out of touch, but I'm saying, where are all those people coming from that are going to pay that kind of monthly rent?
Yeah.
And then, of course, the mayor says, about the kind of growth that he would like to see in the city.
In downtown too.
Clearly something has to be knocked down for that to happen. But I don't know.
Yep. Yes, ma'am. Steve up in front.
Listening to the presentation. Oh, I'm sorry. You just touched on the two things that really struck me as I was listening this evening, and when you were talking about tearing something down, the population that's downtown living in those condos and that's spending $3,000 a month or whatever to do it, because that's my daughter and her friends. They make a lot of money.
Yes,
They're
they
both
do.
highly educated, and they don't want to be tied to a home. They want to be free to move wherever their jobs or any other opportunities take them.
Mm-hmm.
And they like the downtown scene where everything's close, within walking distance. There are clubs, like you said, there's clubs down there. There's just a lot to do. I mean, as far as theater, everything.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure we're ever going to attract that group, especially though, because most of them don't have children. And they're really not interested in driving all the way out here, because they also don't like to be inconvenienced by having to drive very far to work. And many of them work, in the downtown area. So I'm really not sure, what we can do to attract them. But and like I say, there's a lot of money there. But the other thing you were talking about, when you referenced Minneapolis and how their senior population really hadn't increased that much because of Bloomington, Richfield, and Edina building a home for people as they aged. I almost got the feeling, and from what you just said, I had the feeling that you sort of felt maybe that was smart, because they aren't having to deal with the problems of the aging population.
Well,
So-
Minneapolis's challenge is a poor population.
Right.
Yeah.
True.
So, I mean, it's the gap in Minneapolis is tremendous between
Yes.
people with money and people who are really poor.
Right. But I think we're also seeing that more and more.
To
with
age our
just
drivers.
aging.
So we have one back here and then one up here, or 2 up here.
Can we learn much from Richfield and Bloomington? Do we work with them like we do maybe Apple Valley and Burnsville? I'm sure they're experiencing some of those problems already.
I mean, Steve can probably answer this as well as I can, but the short answer is that there are ways of learning that. The city managers talk to each other, certainly. There's a mayor's group that talks as well. So there are lots of lessons learned there, sure. Right up here, Steve. Second row.
You know, I think as we start looking at the senior population and the part of where people choose to live, you look at Bloomington and Richfield, they have a better bus system, they have transit where, because you stop driving at a certain age, or you should, I'm sure people would agree with that, that if you're in this area at this point in time, there is really no way for you to be independent and get around. And once you lose your driver's license, you have lost your independence as an adult.
Mm-hmm. Great. Howard, did you have, oh, okay, Colleen.
I'd like to add one other thing that I hadn't thought of before, but people who live here may at some point want housing for seniors because they want their parents to move and be nearer them. I was on the board of a senior entity for a number of years, and developments in Burnsville were really triggered by that, not by the age of the population present, but by children wanting a place for their parents to be near them.
Yeah, good point.
And I think that's a whole new problem that we didn't have before.
Right.
I mean, when you
Right.
start to think about parents living into their mid-80s.
Mid-80s?
Well, some of us like...
Mid-90s.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's going to be a lot older, and those kids
Yeah.
themselves will
Right.
not be, 30s either. They're going to be 50, 60, and
Right.
now that I'm 54, I know that you don't bounce back as quick anymore. So helping them will not be the
Well,
same
but
as it could have been.
think about the fact, we tend to think that people are sort of empty nested at 50. But if you don't have your first child until you're 37,
Right.
I mean, you are
Your
getting
life is-
close to retirement by the time that child is launched, and if your parents were a little older, I mean, that means very old people.
It's that Oreo population they talk about.
Yeah.
Clean.
I'd comment to that because we did just approve a housing development right up the road here where we have single family and allows for a detached, almost like an apartment style. So
That's good.
we are working on that. But I would ask either one of you, from a city official, and even you worked with the schools a lot, as you talk about the youth being fewer and fewer and the aging, and a lot of the amenities get put around the youth in a city, is what are you seeing some of the other cities do? Because that's really what this visioning process for us is, to say, what do we approve and what do we try to, encourage to come into the community for the future? And are you seeing anything in suburb communities like ours?
Thank you for raising the issue of what do Parks and Recreation do when with an aging population, because it's normal, suburban population started out young, emphasis on youth sports, emphasis on parks, playgrounds, whatever. I think almost now we're overbuilding playgrounds for young children. And more emphasis will have to go to what I call the gentle pursuits as people age. Mm-hmm. They like to walk, they like to watch birds, those sorts of things. Well, they like to run, some of them too, but I mean, it's not playing soccer, it's not playing softball, it's not doing any of those things. And so I think we have to have a shift in our thinking as well.
Yeah.
It's a challenge.
Good point.
Yeah.
Howard?
Yeah, well, thankfully, we will have a focus group that will focus on trails and lakes and parks, and we will include, I'm sure, in that discussion, the whole range of the age population.
Right.
I did want to make one comment, which is related to some of the points already made. That is, when we consider making Lakeville attractive for senior housing, It's not just the housing itself narrowly conceived, but it's the larger infrastructure that we provide related to transit, to walkability, and as some of us who've done research in that know, there's a host of kind of paradigms that we could follow that would make the housing more attractive and workable for people who choose to age in place here or who move here because their children are living here. So I just wanted to make that one point. And I have it's kind of a question and comment, if I can continue, about the income inequality, which was covered in the first presentation. And you mentioned that it was largely driven by differences in educational achievement, college versus no college. But I think at least what we've seen coming up, and this current state demographer has talked about it at some presentations recently at the legislature, that population for middle income has remained stable, while those at the very top has increased quite dramatically. People sometimes look at the last 10 years or last 30 years, but I think that's a significant issue. Perhaps we can look at, I think, more as we go and through this process here. But I think that's an important issue, in addition to education, which has traditionally been very much a cutting-edge thing for predicting inequality. But something else is going on now, it appears.
At the very top it may be, but not at the division that's occurring, that's putting some people at a really low income. That is an issue of education. At the very top, if you look who's at the very top, it's a very, very mixed bag. You can't say that it's any one occupation or anything like that. It's a very diverse group of people. And one of the challenges also is how many people stay within that top 1% over a 5 or 10 year period. It's a lot of in and out as well. We happen to have this real fixation with that at the moment. But it's interesting historically, and it's true today with financial planners, that 70% of all wealth is dissipated by the third generation.
Interesting.
And that was true in the Middle Ages. That's true today.
Funny.
That it's people seemingly don't have the wherewithal to maintain wealth, because as they get farther removed from the people who generated, their desire to spend it accelerates.
There you go.
Well,
They get used to it.
It sounds like that's we're not going to finish that, because I had a comment in response, but I'll leave that for some other discussion. But I did want to mention some of the comments I think were somewhat unfortunate in how you stated them or had them on the slide, Mr. Galler, about decline in personal responsibility and growing government dependence. I mean, I think that seems, in the context of what we're trying to talk about here, that just seemed to me a little bit out of place. And I just wanted to make that comment in addition to some other comments that seem to make light of people in financial difficulties. And I think some of it fueled by the educational differences and what else is going on in the past 10 years. I think it deserves to be noted. Thanks.
Okay.
We told people till 9. So
Yeah, we told them till 9. So let me just, we have one more comment? All right, go ahead.
Just an observation. And, we're talking about the city, we're talking about Minneapolis and the growth that's happening in there, and certainly we have seen these towers spring up and condos spring up. That will come around again as well. If they're all residing there in their older ages, every third floor will have to be a healthcare clinic on those condo units eventually. But I think we have a better opportunity here in Lakeville to not let go of that younger population. I think the biggest growing segment at Hosanna right now is our young people. And one of the biggest things that we're missing in our community is when, even in churches today, are young people. And I don't think we run away from that. I think we address that, and we look at that as an opportunity to say, what do we need to put around here that can bring in those young people and make it a viable place for them to want to be in? because when they leave here, it's hard to want to come back here because there's nothing here for them to come back to. And so I think one of the things, think about education as an opportunity. It'd be great to have something south of the river. We do have Minnesota Business College south of the river here. That's one great opportunity, but why not bring something and let's think as we're looking at this Envision, I love the idea of that, is we can bring some things here that will make this a place to come, and when young people can come back and feel like they have a place to fit in here too. So we can adapt that in the future going forward. Build it, they will come, that mentality.
Yeah.
I think we have that chance, and we can look at that in a positive way too.
Great, thank you. Well, let me just at this point say thank you to all of you for taking your time out tonight. I want to give one more round of applause to our speakers who did a fantastic job here tonight. Let me say, in pulling this together and in closing, I want to encourage everyone here to remember that the point of all this is to create a blueprint for the future. A lot of eloquent speeches about that tonight, but the way that I see this and the way that I hope that the task force sees this is we have to understand who we are before we can understand where we're going. And tonight was all about understanding a little bit more about not only who we are, but also the evidence and the projections for what you're going to have to deal with in order to create that. And I'm hoping that we move the ball forward a little bit for you so that you understand a little bit more about the challenges in front of you. So we can all wish and hope for things, but we have to deal with reality. Some of the reality is, what's the existing housing stock that we have that we'll have to deal with? What are the natural amenities that are here, that are opportunities or that we have to deal with? One of the ways that we've all committed to make this happen, and I'll make one last pitch for you here, we've got the community forums coming up starting on Monday night. And I really need folks to make as many calls, put your arm around, put the pinch on everybody that you know to show up at these forums. It's, again, the dates for those are March 25th and 27th next week, and April 2nd and April 4th the following week. They're all at Kenwood Trail Middle School. They all start at 7 p.m. It's a great opportunity for people to get their voices heard, and it's going to be great raw material for the task force. So please do whatever you can to help turn out folks.